progress. There we go. And we take notes and capture whatever you're putting in the chat and kind of the dialogue. So I'll pop those in here and you should be able to access those. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Jean-Noé, Patrick, and Stéphane, and excited to hear about your work.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. And it's really nice to connect with some new faces, some people that we know already. And just to say, sometimes, we try to do these introductions at the beginning and, like, oh, how much time is that going to take? But then you really feel the energy kind of in the virtual room. So it's a really nice kind of like positive energy that kind of like picking up here. So really appreciative of that. Welcome. So Stéphane, Patrick, and I are joining you from Tiohtià:ke from Montreal, as we know, an unceded traditional Indigenous territory. Many Indigenous peoples converged here long before the arrival of European settlers and still do today. This includes the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation and member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the custodian of the water and lands of this beautiful island and part of the country here. This acknowledgement is really, it's a gesture of solidarity with Indigenous people, but it's also one that reflects the mindset in which we come to you today, as we find ourselves as a bit of a crossroads. We've gone as far as we know that we could, given who we are. Given who we are. So yeah, we're going to share some slides here, but we're going to be speaking through them. Given who we are in our privileges that our identities have given us. We come to you in this safe space in solidarity at a time of great transitions and transformations. I think everybody here on this call is involved in one way or another. And we feel kind of a bit at home, and so to speak, amongst kind of change makers like yourselves. In many ways, the next hour or 47 minutes is very much about you, about this community, and the skills and the roles that enable us to step up to this great transformation and transitions. And so today we're going to speak to you about the Transition Bridges Project. You can go to the next slide, Stéphane. And we'd like to share with you a process of dissonance and resonance about systems change, based on conversations that we've been having with people from different fields, worldviews, professions, identities, and cultures. It's a conversation that I'm sure you're all participating in one way or another. And we're just giving you a sample of some of the, what we're hearing and what we're picking up. And it's a conversation about how we acknowledge the past and the future in ourselves, in the institutions and the systems that we belong to or that we struggle to change, and how to negotiate those fears, those inequities, the injustices, the complex challenges of today, and making a different world collaboratively and more intersectorially, and the level of complexity that we have to navigate. In terms of the three of us, clearly the three of us have a lot in common. It doesn't take a lot to kind of look at the three of us and see like, well, these guys kind of look alike. There's things that we have in common, but we also have each of our own personal and professional journeys. Our combined experience, and we've only kind of captured a few kind of like keywords to kind of indicate where we're coming from and how we're entering this space, is really kind of based on a few decades of working in different ways to change the systems by engaging, including in local government, technology, politics, design, activism, and innovation. And after 1 year of working together in semi-structured interviews, we sketched out an approach that we call systemic mediation, that we feel could help us as a community create the necessary bridges between a diversity of perspectives. And we know that many other perspectives need to be added. And that's kind of the point, is that we're kind of naming a bit of a field that's emerging right now. And we want to kind of see if we're listening correctly, and if there's ways that we can collaborate in taking this conversation forward. Next slide. So what are our hopes for today? We want to embody the change that we want to contribute to. That's really, really important to us. We know that models and metaphors can activate connections and reflections, so we want to share these with you. What inspired us to the point where we are today and connecting with you? We ask you to tell us if our reflections are coherent with what you're feeling as well. We're going to talk about feeling a bit stuck, and we want to kind of unpack that with you. Already we see new initiatives being launched that speak of our kind of systemic collaboration, orchestration, integration needs. I'm sure, like us, you see a number of different initiatives that are popping up to address a similar set of problems and challenges, but maybe from different approaches. And so we want to name that, and we see that as a signal and as an indication that there's a bigger conversation to have. Our hope is to dive deeply into these topics and support sustained, inclusive, and bold dialogue over the long term. La prochaine. Our posture is one of humility, moving away from kind of more traditional kind of human-centered approaches, really from a posture of humility. So humility-centered design. It is one of ambition and imagination. We're all quite creative in this space, or else we wouldn't be doing social innovation. And also of respect for the earth, our environment, and our elders. We're not here to pitch a new consulting service. It's actually quite the opposite. We're interested in field building, our collective leadership, activating ourselves with a new tide that's emerging. It's one of accountability and transparency and being radically collaborative. And many of us have had the opportunity to collaborate in spaces that require that kind of posture by default. Before getting into systemic mediation and turn it over to my two collaborators, I'd like to share with you a little bit more about the context of kind of Montreal in particular. So this is an image that's meant to be a little kind of provocative and a bit of a contradictory, right? Because we look at it and we're like, okay, what's happening here? So this is an image of Earth Day, the Earth Day March in Montreal, just like a gigantic mobilization. People around, and we look at that image and we feel that people around us feel a sense of urgency to strategize, to organize and mobilize. We're seeing this across the country. There's so much kind of goodwill and energy at the moment, but the pathways to change systems with all the partners that are required that need to get involved often seem sometimes unresponsive, inadequate, or too focused on one problem or one symptom. It's a strange feeling to feel closer to one another, to our neighbors, yet to feel a level of powerlessness around where do we go together, to make that change. In short, we have the impression that despite large-scale mobilizations, we're kind of stuck. And I guess we're asking ourselves, are we the only ones? So let's, if you, as you're listening to this, this kind of a context setting piece, thank you, Laura. If others want to share in the chat, your feeling of getting stuck, if you feel that resonates with you at this very moment, and please relate it to your own kind of posture and experience. So we'd like to kind of invite you in the chat to share that with you as we continue here. So as you do that, I'm going to kind of continue in the Montreal kind of context setting here. So just last week, like many cities, right, many communities around the country, there's a lot of different types of mobilizations that are happening. One in Montreal was called it's called the Montreal Climate Summit. And so last week was the second year that it took place with the theme of mobilized in action. So on some measure, it was a really big success. 900 participants, 30 sessions, 80 speakers, hundreds of millions of dollars in announceables, pledges for several new initiatives. The mayor came for both days, for part of it, had ministers from different levels of government. Minister Guilbeault was there as well. And there was a lot of, philanthropy showed up, the new civic alliances, the private sector was there too. It was a lot of excitement. But despite the high energy, the sessions seemed to still be siloed and lack that kind of intersectionality that we know we need now. And towards the end of the second day, I kind of stood in the back of the room and I kind of struggled to see how all these new investments and local actions fit and support each other within our ecosystem. A collective vision that helps us see what we are contributing was lacking. It wasn't clear which structures would help us really kind of drive this change, through, alignment, but also getting into much more kind of intentional, integrated action. We were hearing all these announceables, but we couldn't really fit them together into like a narrative of who we are as a community and how we're making progress collectively. And so that spoke to a lot of missing connections between the stakeholders that were there, and an overarching kind of lack of coherence in the vision that was being presented to us. It felt good, but there was something missing there. So I'm going to pass it over to Stéphane.
So this example that Jean-Louis just described is probably the most recent in our year of work, the three of us. But it illustrates very well, perfectly, the main chasm that the three of us and many others that we interviewed see in the transition work community today. On one side of the landscape, there are several seedlings of various new systems trying to emerge and self-organize to foster deep and radical structural reconfiguration of the very code of our society. Our relationships to nature and the things we interact with in our daily lives to engage us in a true regenerative area. On the other side, we have our eroding and self-preserving old institutions where the will is also present to do differently, but these organizations still struggle to propose transformational innovations. So what is proposed are usually fringe innovation on the fringe from the public and the private sector that are presented through communications campaign as a silver bullet that could fix or help fix the current crisis, prevent almost the sixth mass extinction that is happening right now. And these two worlds that we see there are truly struggling to even interact with each other. And it was a it struck us during the summit in Montreal a couple of days ago. Of course, there are several reasons underlying factors to explain that. So these solitudes are certainly at least partially the result of the heavy weight of the past. First of all, our fragmented way of thinking from our Western heritage that impede the development of systemic perspective and accounting of externalities and benefits from our collective actions. That's one thing. Also, the impact of colonialism that leads to the legitimate need to heal from many communities before engaging in system change or disruption of any sort. Systemic racism that create also additional barriers to overcome for several communities that are also most vulnerable to the actual social environmental crisis. Power asymmetries and capital accumulation of different forms. So not only economic capital, but also political capital, cultural and social capital that are often not addressed explicitly when projects are emerging, multi-stakeholder projects are emerging. So leaving room for latent tensions that can impede collective transition initiatives. Some of our chronic difficulty also to align divergent objective and incentive of stakeholders result often in high friction in the implementation of transformational initiative, very high delays and no completion rate. Because of the market economy that we are in, there is also this tyranny of solutionism, which can occult or at least dampen the collectively perceived need for structural radical transformation of our institutions to really address the challenge of the great transition. The theory of the practice in this field of work is not easily reconcilable also. So in this field of work, we still have this chasm between knowledge and theoretical framework and experiential knowledge from the field, different ways of knowing. And we have a hard time reconciliating these in a way that will engage all the publics of society in this transition. And I'm not talking here about the institutional inertia that everyone knows. So enough talking on my side for now. I would like to give you maybe a couple of minutes just to react to these, just celle d'avant, Stéphane, s'il te plaît. So to these different elements, I would like to know if in this list, what are the elements that resonates the most with you in this list as major obstacles to the great transition that we are trying to be part of and to be active agents from? Are there any other elements that you would like to share that are not there that we should take into account in pursuing this reflection process with you in the future? So that would be, if we can take like 2-3 minutes just to reflect on that, that would be perfect in the chat.
And as you're reflecting in the chat, if there's somebody who wants to maybe just, guys, we have like 2-3 minutes. If somebody wants to speak up and also kind of give a bit of context for maybe one example, one element, I think we want to welcome that too. I see Graham, you've got your hand up, please.
Thanks, Jean-Noé. I just give you a very simple example of the project that we finished phase 1, year 1 of last week. It's called the Montreal Roundtable for the Transition of Religious Property. And we raised all of the stakeholders from the city, the province, the community tables, the Arts Council, all of the major religious groups, and a really wonderful selection of major foundations, all present to talk along with the Chantier d'économie sociale about really re-steering the entire focus towards économie sociale and not towards religion, which everybody knows we shouldn't steer towards, but also neither towards heritage, fixing, bricks, rather, fixing for people to put their charities there. So we've been going through this process. I'm really interested in where you're going on here. And the only thing I would add is, I don't know how to say it, but the tension between those, we use this phrase to say that the church is going through a once in 500 year operating system revolution. And we only work with those who they live that every day. They say, oh my God, thank you so much for saying that. And then the other group are those who are trying to pretend that that's not the case. And that's our first thing, is just telling and just saying, you know what, if you're trying to pretend this is not happening, we probably won't be able to do very good work with you. So we're in the middle of it. It's a great, it's exactly in line with what you're talking about. And I'm all ears listening to your systems. It's great to hear.
Okay, thank you. So I see Emmanuel and Lisa writing the paralysis of the present. For some community, the sense of our urgency is here, but the dimensions of being stuck can be overwhelming. Totally. Thank you for that. The fragmented thinking, but also polarized thinking. Yeah, where there are very opposed different interpretation at this moment. Yeah, so that's the uncertainty of divisions that we have at the screen a little bit. Yeah, so, thank you very much for sharing that. And please go ahead if you have some other things in mind. As practitioners in this field of work, there is a simple metaphor that we like to use to describe our line of work, and it is the bridge in front of us. Maybe Stefan, the other one. So the great transition bridge, and at this point in time, we feel that we do not have many crossbars to get on the other side. And while it's important, and I think Jean-Noé stated that, it's important to celebrate all the steps that we are doing moving forward. We believe that it's also important to recognize that the majority of the crossbars that are already there, that we can see, okay, at this point in time, they will desperately needs better alignment and orchestration with all publics of society as far as increasing the resilience of our communities is concerned. So the ESG criteria, electrification, of transportation, decarbonization of buildings are all great for sure. Most of these, though, are incremental innovation rooted in mental models of the past, and often come with a whole set of systemic negative externalities that are still not accounted for. After all, the greenest building is not the one that you decarbonize, it's the one that you don't need to build, right? So, so the big question for us now is, how can we become better contributor at building that bridge and securing that bridge? This is where we went a couple of weeks ago in London with the SI Canada delegation. And we went to a presentation from the folks from Civic Square and Imandeep Kaur. They presented us that quote from Ilya Prigozhin. The quote is, "When a complex system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift an entire system to a higher order." And I must admit that this quote resonated a lot with us like a thunderstorm. We see in that sea of chaos, let's say, the state of fragmentation and sometimes paradoxical initiative that we have been referring to since the beginning of our presentation right now in the previous slides. So lots of announcements in a lot of direction, lots of talk, a lot of sectorial engagement and targets, but a fundamental lack of societal alignments in our territories. So next, simply. So in that sea of chaos, odds are that self-organization will happen after, a certain period, but that period is undefined right now, okay? And we don't have a lot of time. It's a time that we don't have because it's midnight plus 10 right now. So a big challenge is, how do we catalyze more coherence? How can we be more intentional at catalyzing coherence in this field of work? Coherence between the old and the new system to accelerate shift to a desired future, between the inner and the outer fields of the system to activate and harmonize a critical mass of desired behavior, between different scales of the system to activate proper flow of information and resources over the long run to support these transformational initiatives that are emerging, or at least that wants to emerge. So, prochain. So our hypothesis right now is that fostering or nurturing an explicit practice of systemic mediation might be an interesting idea to contribute to support stronger island of coherence. That could support better or make us better steward at supporting transformational initiative we are engaged in already as practitioners. So now there's no doubt that many of us, you guys here, are already doing system mediation in one form or another, more or less informally in your daily practice. So the main question, I guess, for us today that we would like to ask you would be, would you see a need or a real opportunity to build an explicit field of practice focusing on systemic mediation? A little bit like the developmental evaluation field was developed a decade ago. Is this something that could be developed with a dedicated set of practice, a focus on the development of specific skill sets, posture, with a set of tailored approaches, processes, and tools? Would there be a case for that? For instance, could we even envision having system mediators as explicit and a mandatory role position as part of regional transition initiative teams or consortium in the field? Just like we are now used to see designers, project managers, funders, activists, evaluators, etc., in our collective project right now. Our intuition is that there might be a case for that, but to validate that intuition, we feel that we need to have a couple of conversations with people like you guys, and to first explore a bit more what systemic mediation could like concretely. The practice of system mediation could emphasize several areas of work depending on the lens that we choose to see the system through, that's for sure. So I'm gonna give you a couple of examples. So if we take this Berkana Institute loop showing a system that is at the end of his life, and another one that wants to emerge in the bottom, the second loop, we see that the transition between those systems could be accompanied, let's say like that, through a set of action. Action of what? Action of hospicing the hold, stewarding grief, bringing re-enchantment to stakeholders of the actual system, and helping them see how they could fit in the emerging system through transformational narrative. That would be one way of doing system mediation. The composting part of that transition would be to identify assets from the actual system that we can rearrange, that we can do some permutation on it, and the purpose to serve the purpose better of the emerging system, and define pathways to mobilize such asset. When I think about the work that Dark Matter Lab within DJOR are doing, I see them doing that composting phase, you know, so they work a lot with existing asset that they try to repurpose to serve the goal of the new system that needs to emerge. And also supporting, orchestrating what's happening in the loop at the bottom. So supporting the alignment of transformative actions and initiatives that are emerging from the new system loop, hybridizing old asset and new asset anchored in a radically different mindset of what value is for a society that it needs to be in transition. So that would be 3 areas of work in this referential, but we have other models. So this second model is an adaptation we did from the Frank Gill's multi-level models of socio-technical transformation. It's another take on system mediation. We can see systemic mediation as a way to link several nested fields of work on systems. Linking the work that organizations like Wolf Willow Institute, for instance, are doing at the micro scale. So that work is all the underbelly work that is done with individuals, change makers, managers of some organizations, you know, all the work that is done to decolonize our minds and to become better steward of that new system in the making, beyond, you know, resisting the propulsion to fall into the solutionism mindset. How do you link that to the work that try to identify new ways of collaboration, of balancing power dynamics in groups and between groups, and create social capital, bonding, bridging, linking social capital? How do you mediate that with the work that can be done at the macro scale with the institution to address the capacity of these institutions to design deep reconfiguration of parts or whole systems? So that's another take, another referential that in which we could see system mediation blossoming. And a third lens could be the Gill's model in itself. So this model invites us to mediate the relationship between social movements at the landscape level and actors of the regime, so the institution, organization, by amplifying and translating their voices, becoming ally. What allyship means when you're a system mediator, it's a question mark. It's something that we need to understand. And how could you mediate, you know, then the relationship between all the innovations that happen at the niche level, so in communities, and bring them to at the regime level so they can replace some of the process, some of the practices, some of the policies, some of the culture of regulation, for instance, and how do we change the existing system in that way? So that would be another take on system mediation. So all of these models could be seen as different flavors of what systemic mediation could look like, but also we're totally conscious that there could be many other perspectives on it stemming from different worldviews and different ways of knowing. But this is pretty much where we are stuck right now in our process. So Stéphane.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, as we've seen among these different models, we really feel that systemic mediation is somehow implicitly present in these different models. And in our ongoing process to see if systemic mediation could be a real thing, if we could work on it, we try to dig on what it could mean, what it could be, how it can be embodied in real life. So here we present 4 possible embodiments, 4 types of activities that could be systemic mediation. So stewarding responsibility in a collaborative and supportive way, which means basically being sure that and I've seen that in the comments, nobody has responsibility sometimes on those issues. But the fact is that nobody, on most of these issues, nobody can be individually or even as an organization responsible. So how can we support that among other people, we share this responsibility and it's not lost? It's not the kind of thing where it's everybody, so it's nobody. It has to be everybody, and everybody has to own something. Obviously, disagreements and antagonism will not disappear, but we really feel, and our experience points toward the fact that it can be framed, it can be designed as a mutual challenge, and agreeing that we have to go through that, and it has to be worked. Hybridizing the old and the new elements of the system, it's quite clear in the two loops model that Patrick showed. We don't believe that there is only about the new. Or obviously, we don't believe that going back 200 or 500 years back will provide a solution in the situation that we have. So we have to hybridize. We have to see what works and what are the assets that are useful in the old, and what are the assets and what could be used in the new. And finally, and I've seen that also in the comments, it can be overwhelming to work at the different scales, but it has to be done. And ideally, some people have to do it. And we think that people doing systemic mediation could be the right people to really dedicate themselves in making sure that it works at the different scale. So as I said, it's our take on it, and it's limited by who we are and our world vision. So once again, we could open the floor, and either through the chat, or if you want to intervene, I will just stop the screen sharing, and we can take maybe 10 minutes to share about that, and then we could continue. So basically, how do you react to those 4 possible embodiments of what could be systemic mediation? Or if you see something else that you could see that would activate, that would mean be in systemic mediation.
That's an interesting point, Emmanuel. Maybe Jean-Noé, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah,
or maybe I can. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to reflect on that. So the kind of mediation as a negotiating differences, as like the underpinning kind of like a broad general kind of like understanding, and a mediator. I think we're kind of thinking about it from that bridge kind of building, kind of like metaphor, and how does it feel to stand on top of that bridge and having almost like a privileged kind of like vantage point, but also that kind of feeling stuck. And I guess it would be like a systemic transformer. Maybe that sounds too much like a kid's toy or something. But I think the mediation is also maybe language that is used in describing competencies and kind of skill set that might kind of resonate with folks. And I think we're kind of giving ourselves a bit of a permission to kind of go, we are mediating, we are negotiating. We're not professional negotiators, but we do have to juggle a lot of different ways of finding compromise in the situations that we find ourselves. So that's why we opted for mediation.
And with agency, I think that the end goal is to foster, accelerate, contribute to accelerate transformation. For us, mediation doesn't mean compromise. It means putting people together, changing mindset, working with these actors to harmonize their work in the service of the new system that needs to emerge, which is different than trying to mediating to find a positionality that doesn't serve anyone.
Well, Graham, if you can go if you want, if there is nobody else willing to speak.
I think this is absolutely awesome. I mean, this is an outstanding presentation. I mean, you have really smashed it. And when I think about some of the things that we've done, we are on the far end of activism, of working in our field, which has gained us a lot of respect, but also means that we cannot do some of the work of mediation because we're on the far end of pulling a system. Okay. And our work is with churches and their properties. The asset that's composting is land. I think you have such a huge opportunity ahead of you to scale your work, and it brings me to the cities and foundations in those cities. We could not have done the project that I mentioned before without the support of a very generous foundation that many of you know, who decided to focus their work instead of nationally to focus it in Montreal. And they then brought other foundations around, and they know what quality work requires. To me, this is an incredible role for city-based foundations, including community foundations, and we have a few people represented nationally and in particular cities. And I think I raised the question of funding because in general, you want to look like the most credible actor on the scene to be able to get the funding, right? But the most credible actor on the scene may not be the right person to do the mediation. So I just recognize that issue. And the final thing I would say is making this playful, especially in the really difficult situations, I think is a real challenge. And people are emotionally, and you've mentioned it, you've referred to it a few times, but we've certainly seen this as well, where I'd say the positionality of the different actors is one thing. And we talked about this at the round table, but the individual psychological capacity of certain people is so low right now in certain sectors that you want to say, guys, do you think you can make this journey? Because if you know you can't, then you should come out earlier. And in our case, we had the project we're running, the next meeting of it is tonight. We invented 2 characters. And I used to work in advertising. We always would invent a character. And we invented a character who was basically his grandmother called him to her graveside and said, you know, Johnny, I'm about to die. You've never been going to church, but as my dying wish, please will you join the board of the church? You know, look after it for me. And of course, the guy says, of course, Grandma, I'll do it. And he ends up running the board. Now he's in charge. He's called Jeff, there's a female character called Jane. And we said, let's build a course around these people and let's deal with their issues of dealing with the old guard going out. So your composting and your hospice care, they are literally living it out around these assets. And to me, those characters, we have 120 churches across Canada signed up for our pilot of this thing. And we have the meeting tonight. So my point is, how could you scale your work? How could the foundations fund it? How can we make it playful? I love where you're going on here, and it would be really helpful for our work to connect more. Merci.
Thank you. And I really like the initial point you raised about activism, because that's one of the points we all of 3 have gone through activism, and we know how much we can do with that, but we also know the limits that it imposes, that you're tagged as an activist, which means that you cannot do the facilitation or the mediation because you're considered as being on one side. If there is no other comment, I will continue, and we will cover the question of
Michelle would like to.
Sorry, I'll just be really quick. I know sometimes I try not to jump in too much, but since people don't have a lot of hand up, I'm like, I gotta put my hand up. So when I first heard mediation, as you know, I went to remediation, but my point is that I find myself thinking there's, like you had said, a common pathway rather than the intersecting pathways. But I'm understanding after this presentation, like the differentiator of what you're proposing. And it does feel like a new space in the systems transformation. I'll use that big, like lofty word, I guess. It does feel like a space nobody's really kind of going into. And so it feels like there's something happening when I heard this quote this morning about, you know, is it tragic or magic that we disagree? And so I think the world is trying to tell me something right now between,
okay,
you know,
nice.
So thank you.
Okay. Wow.
So back on the screen sharing. So when we were discussing with some of the people we discussed with about that, someone and some of the people know her, it's Nadia Duguay, said, okay, guys, you're creating a new role, basically. And that's what we've worked for the last weeks and the last months, which is what could it be? And Graham, you mentioned the notion of skills. It's okay, what skills do we need? We try to think if an existing role could be that function, but until now we haven't found any. So what we're doing now is we're doing as if it's a new role. It doesn't mean that it will necessarily be a new role. Maybe it will be a hybridization of an existing role or supercharge an existing one. But in the meantime, we do the thought process of what if it's a new role and what if we have to create something from scratch somehow. And well, basically, what needs to come with that. So there again, a quote about this idea that we need not only, and I've been an innovation manager, I've been in charge of innovation of the city of Montreal, so I know what it is. And I agree with that quote that we have to think something new, we have to think something more long-term, and we have to think something that it's less internal organizational, but it's more how to work among stakeholders. So here we've tried to map some skills on the left, which is more what used to be valued in innovation and in the overall innovation field. And on the right, what we think might be the new skills or additional skills that are needed. I will not go through each of them, but for me, it's really on the left, the idea of hard skills versus on the other one, the inner work that we have to do. And as Patrick said, how do we evolve, how we decolonize, how we change our worldview about where we are and where we want to go. There's a lot about, so again, hard skills, it was really fosters targeted on infrastructure investment. There's been a lot of money, and we all know, at least government, maybe a little less philanthropies, are a lot about infrastructure investment. What we think is the soft skills that we have to use will be toward new social infrastructure, and we really feel that's something it's important, but that's the kind of infrastructure that is not built among experts. It's something that's built if you involve everybody. So you're able to involve activists, you're able to involve governments, philanthropies, and so on. And that's where we think this idea of systemic mediation is coming from. And also this idea, and Graham, you somehow exemplified it through storytelling, which is, okay, creating characters or creating new narratives and so on. And we really feel that's something that's important. So there again, we don't claim to have discovered the wheel or discover anything really new. We're really trying to put together things that we've seen, things that we've done, and things that we see people doing. But people are us doing that part of our job, but sometimes on top of our job, and thinking, how can this be something really clearly defined and with a field of work that we could work on. So we have too many screens. And so, yeah, there again, it will be our last short period of discussion. And maybe we could go on the chat because the time is running. But if you see other skills in your mind, well, you say, okay, mediator should also be able to do this or should be able to do that, please share them with us, and we'll try to gather them. And then I will pass back to Jean-Noé, who will explain what will be our next steps.
So yeah, I think we're already seeing a little bit of that naming of different skill set that would fall under the umbrella of the systemic mediator. I like Emmanuel around a combination of network weaver, storyteller, and mediator. I think this is all very good. To Graham's question, no, we haven't. That's something we could explore in terms of funding. And this is kind of like an invitation to think of those situations where you've been, and you're like, where am I kind of reaching kind of within, you know, these types of skills that enable us to kind of get us unstuck in situations that require more coherence. So as you think through different skill set, just want to highlight a few next steps for ourselves. And obviously welcome kind of input and feedback around other potential next steps that you may see to pursue and to build upon the conversation that we've initiated with you today. I think so from an engagement with the community's perspective. So like we said from the beginning, it's really, really important for us, you know, from that network builder kind of perspective, that we recognize how people are already kind of acting as systemic mediators, but aren't necessarily naming it as such. So we do have, more connections to make, and I think the coming months are going to be a good opportunity for that. We want to organize a dialogue session over the summer to discuss bridging challenges. So kind of to keep on the focus on the transitions bridges aspect. What are the experiences, emerging situations? Maybe we can start thinking about different cases where different skill set are more needed than others. So moving from a more kind of reactive, kind of spontaneous way of kind of navigating challenging situations to kind of already anticipating and hopefully planning ahead and seeing like, okay, as a systemic mediator, what's in my toolbox? How can I anticipate? How do I address, different types of dynamics? And reporting back to you all, but then also more broadly, and whoever is interested in collaborating. That's really important for, just as a field building aspect. What we're looking for, obviously, is to learn more, and we've seen this in the chat, other initiatives, that may connect with what we're talking about today. We'd like to identify prototyping opportunities. One locally in Montreal and one nationally in a pan-Canadian context. We have some good ideas around how this could play out according to different types of situations, given our kind of joint perspective. And we need a context, a trusted kind of like environment to experiment and to prototype and to work alongside, partners that are already mobilized. As well as explore different organizational structures for ourselves. So today, in the lead up to this conversation, we came up with a name for the project. I think we're looking at, structurally to think about not just a project, but maybe more a collective. And so we want to think through that, recognizing that it's not just the three of us here. And clearly today, with the feedback that we're hearing, it's a much broader conversation that we need to have. So what structure would actually help us kind of bring these different threads together and really kind of think at a level of detail and depth around how this can be, offered back to the community of stakeholders. So this is us. This is kind of our first go. We've been preparing for this conversation. We'd love to stay in touch with you. Here's how you can reach the three of us. I'm really appreciative and grateful for all the input and feedback and just the safe space of trying to name something that's quite complicated and challenging, but seeing how it connects with you. I think for myself at least, it's extremely motivating, and it's kind of bridging that feeling of getting stuck here.
It is for me too. Thank you so much, everyone, and I hope that we'll have some of you guys in the next step to make that conversation flourish and a little more.
Fantastic. Love the use of the chat. That was great when you have such a big group, and we'll have the chat to save, and we'll make sure we save that to the notes. Thank you. You can tell there was a lot of energy around this and excitement. So appreciate, I know it takes a lot to prepare for these moments. So gratitude to the three of you and to all of you who've come and shared so generously. And yeah, I think as your mind keeps percolating, make sure to get in touch for sure. And if you can't find them, let me know and I can help make that connection. Note that I have put us to 1 a month in July and August for transition innovation group sessions. And then May 31st, we had an overlap, and Kazito from the Rwandan Canadian Healing Center was supposed to present, but he's going to come to an in-person gathering around transforming capital in Toronto. And so we're rescheduling that one. So we will, make sure that we keep this this group going, because I see just really cool sharing. And a reminder, if that's you, let me know. Is there anything else? Taryn, I see you came, and John a little after we did introductions. Welcome. Am I forgetting anything, Taryn? You're always helping me. I think we're good.
Feel like you summed it up really well. Nothing's popping up for me, but we'll make sure to share it in the notes.
Okay. And if you happen to be in Toronto, May 31st, and you want to come to a conversation about rethinking the core assumptions of philanthropy, hit me up on the link with some details, and have a wonderful day. Thanks for being here all.
Thank
You
you very
too,
much,
guys.
Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle. Bye bye, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Look at the 3 of us left. Let me hit stop on the recording. Did you get your, wait, stop.